The ground was still wet with dew when Mia Callahan heard the first growl. She froze between two rows of gray headstones, her heart slamming against her ribs. It was not yet 6 in the morning. The cemetery should have been empty. She had chosen this hour on purpose, the way she always did, because it was the only time of day when no one from her pack would see her, whisper about her, or step out of her way like she carried some kind of sickness. Here, kneeling in front of her father's grave, she was allowed to simply be his daughter. Nothing else. But the growl came again, low and rolling, and this time it was joined by another, and another, until the misty air around her seemed to hum with the sound of it. Mia turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. They were everywhere. White wolves, easily 20 of them, stood in a wide circle around her, their fur pale as bone in the gray morning light, their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. She had grown up around wolves her entire life. She had been surrounded by her own pack for 22 years, but she had never in her life seen wolves like these. They were larger than any she had encountered, their shoulders as high as her chest, their presence so heavy, it pressed against her skin like a physical weight. She did not move. She did not breathe. Every instinct she had learned as the lowest-ranked member of her pack screamed at her to lower her eyes, to make herself small, to give no one a reason to strike her down. As an Omega, she had no strength to defend herself if this pack decided she was prey. Her rank meant she healed slower, fought weaker, and mattered less than almost anyone else in wolf society. She had been reminded of that fact every single day of her life. If this pack wanted to kill her right now, on top of her father's grave, there would be nothing she could do to stop them. And yet, they did not move either. They simply sat. One by one, as if some silent command had passed between them, the wolves lowered themselves to the ground, their golden and amber eyes never leaving her, their ears still alert, their bodies coiled and ready but calm. It was not the posture of a hunt, it was something else, something that looked, impossibly, like patience. Mia's mind raced. Perhaps this was a warning from a rival pack. Perhaps someone had sent them to frighten her, to remind her that even in death, her father's family was not safe. She thought of her alpha, Grant Osborne, and the way he looked at her, like she was a stain on his territory. She thought of Nora, his mate, who had made it her personal mission over the years, to remind Mia that Omegas existed only to serve. Perhaps this was their doing. Perhaps this was meant to be her end. But then the largest of the wolves, the one standing directly across from her, closest to her father's headstone, rose to its feet. He was enormous, his coat a deep, luminous white that seemed to catch every bit of light in the clearing, and his eyes were a molten gold that Mia had never seen in any wolf before, human or shifted. He did not growl, he did not bare his teeth, he simply looked at her, and then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his massive head toward the stone marking her father's grave. It was, unmistakably, a bow. Mia's breath left her in a shaking rush. She did not understand what she was seeing. Wolves did not bow to graves. Wolves did not bow to anything, unless the one they bowed to held power far greater than their own. And this wolf, whoever he was, radiated more power than she had ever felt in her life, more than her own alpha, more than anyone she had ever stood near. For a long moment, nothing happened. The mist curled around the headstones. The birds that should have been singing by now stayed silent, as if even they understood something significant was unfolding in this quiet corner of the world. Then the great white wolf began to change. Mia had seen shifting before. Every wolf in her pack could do it, and she herself could shift when her body allowed, though it always cost her more than it seemed to cost the others. But she had never seen a change happen with such fluid, effortless grace. There was no cracking of bone, no visible strain, no grimace of pain. The wolf simply seemed to fold inward and rise upward at the same time, fur receding into skin, 4 legs becoming 2, until where the animal had stood there was now a man. He was tall, taller than anyone in her pack, with dark hair that fell just past his ears, and shoulders built like something carved from stone. He wore no shirt, only a pair of dark pants that had appeared from nowhere the way shifted clothing sometimes did, and even standing there in the fog of the cemetery, dressed so simply, he carried himself like someone who had never once in his life needed to ask permission for anything. But it was his eyes that held her, that same molten gold, calm and steady, fixed entirely on her. "You are Mia," he said. It was not a question. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. How do you know my name? The man's gaze flicked briefly to the headstone behind him, to the weathered letters spelling out Edwin Callahan, beloved father, and something in his expression shifted, softened, the way a person's face changes when they are remembering someone they respected deeply. I have been looking for you for a long time, he said. Longer than you have been alive, in a way. Mia's mind spun. Nothing about this made sense. She glanced past him at the 19 other wolves, still seated in their perfect circle, patient and silent, watching the exchange like an audience waiting for a performance to continue. Then she looked back at the man in front of her, at the unmistakable authority radiating off him, even as he stood still, hands loose at his sides, making no move toward her. Who are you? She asked. My name is Cale Ashraver, he said. I am the alpha of the Ashriver pack, in the Northern Territories. The name hit her like a physical blow, even isolated as she was within her own pack, even kept at the bottom of a hierarchy that rarely bothered to speak to her directly. She had heard of Cale Ashriver. Everyone had heard of him. He was not simply an alpha, he was spoken of in the same breath as legends, a leader whose territory stretched across more land than most packs could dream of controlling, whose strength in battle was the subject of stories told to pups at night. Some called him the Alpha King, a title so rarely given that only a handful of wolves in the last century had ever earned it. And he was standing in front of her father's grave. I don't understand, Mia said, her voice trembling now, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer impossibility of the moment. Why are you here? Why are you bowing to my father's grave? I'm nobody. I'm an Omega. Whatever business you have, it can't be with me. Something flickered across Cale's face, something that looked almost like anger, though she quickly realized it was not directed at her. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening for just a moment before he composed himself again. You are wrong, he said, about several things, but we do not need to discuss all of them here, in the cold, standing over your father's resting place. Will you allow me to explain? Mia glanced again at the 20 white wolves surrounding them, each one calm, each one waiting. If Cale Ashraver had wanted to hurt her, she understood with sudden clarity that he would not have needed to speak a single word first. He could have ended her the moment she turned around. Instead, he had bowed. Explain, she said, drawing whatever courage she had left up through her chest. Please. Cale studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to say, and then he glanced toward the headstone again, his expression turning distant, pulled back into a memory she could not see. Many years ago, he began, before I held the rank I hold now, before my father passed his territory to me, I fought in the War of Broken Fangs. You may have heard of it. Most packs lost something in that war. Mine lost nearly a third of its warriors in a single season. Mia had heard of the war, though only in fragments, the way most young wolves learned history, through half-remembered stories told by elders who did not like to dwell on the details. She nodded slowly, unsure where this was leading but afraid to interrupt. During one of the worst battles, Cale continued, my unit was ambushed near a ravine in contested territory. I was young then, reckless, convinced of my own invincibility the way most young wolves are. I pushed too far ahead of my line. The ground gave way beneath me, and I fell. He paused, and something raw moved behind his golden eyes. It was not a small fall. The ravine was deep, lined with rock, and I broke more bones than I can easily count. I could not shift to heal myself fast enough. I could not climb. I lay there, certain I was going to die alone in the dark, forgotten by my own pack, in the chaos of retreat. Mia's chest tightened. She had not expected a story like this. She had expected talk of politics, of territory disputes, of some obligation, involving her pack's leadership. She had not expected something so personal. That is when your father found me, Cale said quietly. He was not part of my unit. He was not even from my territory. He was a low-rank soldier from a neighboring pack, sent to scout the area, and by every rule of war, he had no reason to help an enemy alpha's son, bleeding out at the bottom of a ravine. It would have been easier, safer, smarter, for him to walk away and let nature finish what the fall had started. He didn't walk away, Mia whispered. It was not a question. She knew her father. Even in the handful of years she'd had with him before he passed, she had known exactly the kind of man he was. "No," Cale said, and for the first time, something like a smile touched the corner of his mouth, faint and full of old gratitude. He climbed down into that ravine, at great risk to himself, with enemy patrols still moving through the area above us. He set my bones as best he could with nothing but broken branches and torn cloth. He carried me, over his own shoulders, for nearly 2 miles, through territory that could have gotten us both killed, until he found a safe place to leave me where my own pack could find me. He never told them who he was. He never asked for anything in return. By the time I was strong enough to go looking for the man who saved my life, he had already disappeared back into the chaos of the war, and it took me years, decades even, to learn his name. Mia felt tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. She had always known her father was a good man, gentle in a way that had made him something of an outcast among the more aggressive wolves in their pack. But she had never known this story. He had never spoken of it, not once. "I made an oath that day," Cale said, his voice steady now, carrying the weight of a promise, kept for longer than Mia had been alive. "I swore that if Edwin Callahan, or his bloodline ever needed anything within my power to give, I would answer that call myself, no matter the cost, no matter how long it took to find them. A debt like that does not simply fade because time has passed. It does not disappear because the man who earned it has passed on. It transfers. It waits." The mist around them seemed to grow heavier, or perhaps it was only the weight of the moment pressing down on Mia's shoulders. She looked past Cale at the headstone, at her father's name carved into cold stone, and she felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been closed for a very long time. "I searched for him for years after the war ended," Cale continued. "It took far longer than I would like to admit. Wartime records are messy, and low-ranked soldiers rarely leave much of a trail. By the time I finally found which pack he belonged to, and which town held his grave, I learned that he had already passed away, and that he had left behind a daughter." His gaze settled fully on her now, steady, unwavering. "You." Mia opened her mouth, but no words came. 20 years of feeling invisible, of being told her existence carried no weight in the eyes of Wolf Society, and now the most powerful alpha in the region was standing in front of her, telling her that her father's kindness had followed her all the way here, waiting patiently across decades to finally be repaid. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "You do not need to say anything yet," Cale said gently. "I only needed you to know the truth. The debt I owe is not to a memory. It is to you, the last living piece of the man who saved my life, and asked for nothing in return." He glanced briefly at the other wolves still seated around them, patient as statues. "I brought my personal guard with me, because I did not know what I would find here, or whether you would be safe, or whether your own pack would allow me to speak with you freely. I did not come to frighten you, Mia. I came to finally repay a debt that has waited far too long already." The sun had begun to rise properly now, spilling pale gold light across the cemetery, catching in the white fur of the wolves still seated in their circle, turning them almost luminous. Mia stood in the center of it all, her father's grave behind her, an alpha king in front of her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not feel invisible at all. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Cale's expression softened, and something in his golden eyes seemed to promise that whatever came next, she would not have to face it the way she had faced everything else in her life so far. "Alone. Now," he said, "we make this right." Mia did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the small room she rented at the edge of the Packlands, replaying every word Cale Ashriver had said to her in the cemetery. The rest of the morning had passed in a blur. He had not pressed her for a decision. He had simply asked where she lived, told her he and his wolves would remain nearby, and given her space to breathe. It was such a small kindness, and yet it was more consideration than most members of her own pack had shown her in years. By the time dawn broke fully over the hills the next day, word had already begun to spread. Someone, somewhere, had seen the white wolves gathered near the cemetery, or seen Cale himself walking through the edge of town in human form, and now every wolf in the pack seemed to know that something unusual had happened. Eyes that normally slid past her without a flicker of interest now lingered, curious, suspicious, unsure what to make of the rumors already twisting through the pack like wildfire. She kept her head down and walked toward the market at the center of town, hoping the ordinary rhythm of the morning might settle her racing thoughts. It did not. Is it true? The voice belonged to Lily Bennett, the only person in the entire pack who had ever treated Mia like she mattered. Lily fell into step beside her, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and worry. People are saying the Ashriver pack was here. That the Alpha King himself came looking for you. Mia hesitated. She trusted Lily more than anyone, but even now, standing in the middle of the market with wolves glancing their way from every direction, she wasn't sure how much to say. It's true, she said finally, keeping her voice low. He says my father saved his life, a long time ago, during the war. Lily's mouth fell open. Your father? Edwin? That's what he told me. Mia glanced around, uneasy under the weight of so many curious stares. He says he owes our family a debt, that he's here to repay it. To you, Lily said slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Mia, do you understand what this means? The Alpha King doesn't just show up somewhere for no reason. If he's claiming a debt to your bloodline, that's not a small thing. That could change everything for you. Mia wanted to believe that, but a lifetime of disappointment had taught her not to trust good things too quickly. Or, it could be nothing, she said. Maybe he says a few kind words, gives me some token gift to settle his conscience, and then leaves. People like him don't usually stay involved in the lives of people like me. People like you, Lily repeated, her tone sharpening slightly. Mia, you are not less than anyone else in this pack, no matter what Grant or Nora have spent years trying to convince you of. Before Mia could respond, a familiar and unwelcome voice cut through the market noise behind them. Well, well, look who's causing all this commotion. Mia's shoulders tensed instantly. Nora Vance, Alpha Grant Osborne's mate and second in command, approached with two other wolves flanking her, her expression carrying the particular blend of amusement and contempt she always reserved for Mia. Nora was beautiful in the sharp, cold way that made people forget how cruel beauty could be, and she had never once missed an opportunity to remind Mia exactly where she stood in the pack's hierarchy. I heard the strangest rumor, Nora continued, circling slowly, her eyes raking over Mia, like she was inspecting something she found distasteful. Something about wolves from the north showing up at that pathetic little cemetery. Surely they weren't here for you. Mia forced herself to stand still, to not shrink the way her body wanted to. They were here to honor my father. Nora's laugh was sharp and cutting. Your father. The Omega who never rose above the lowest ranks his entire life. What could a man like that possibly have done to earn the attention of someone like Cale Ashriver? He saved his life, Lily cut in, her voice fierce with loyalty. During the war, he pulled the Alpha King out of a ravine and carried him for 2 miles through enemy territory. For just a moment, something like genuine surprise crossed Nora's face, quickly smoothed away and replaced with practiced disdain. How touching. I'm sure that's exactly what happened. Her gaze slid back to Mia. Regardless, I would not get too comfortable with whatever attention you're receiving. Powerful men make grand gestures sometimes. It rarely lasts. You'll still be an Omega, long after he's grown bored and moved on to more important matters. The words landed exactly where Nora intended them to land, striking at the fear Mia had been carrying since yesterday morning. She said nothing, unable to find a response that wouldn't betray how deeply the comment had cut, and Nora, satisfied with the silence, swept past her with her small entourage trailing behind. Lily watched them go, her jaw tight with anger. Don't listen to her, Mia. She's threatened. That's all this is. She's threatened because for once, something powerful is happening around you, and she can't control it. Mia wanted to believe her friend, but doubt had already taken root, growing colder and heavier with every passing hour. What if Nora was right? What if this was simply a grand gesture from a powerful man who would forget her the moment he returned to his own territory? She had built her entire life around the expectation of disappointment, and it felt safer, somehow, to expect it now than to let herself hope for anything more. She spent the rest of the day in a fog, moving through her usual chores at the edge of town, gathering herbs for the pack healer, mending torn nets down by the river, all the tasks considered too menial for wolves of higher rank. Every so often, she caught herself glancing toward the tree line at the edge of the territory, wondering if Kale and his wolves were still nearby, wondering if she had already missed her chance to speak with him again. She had not missed it. As the sun began to sink low over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, Mia found him waiting near the same cemetery where they had first met, though this time he was alone, without the 20 wolves who had accompanied him before. He stood near her father's grave again, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, watching the horizon with an expression she couldn't quite read. He turned as she approached, and something in his golden eyes eased, as if he had genuinely wondered whether she would come. "I wasn't sure you would want to see me again so soon," he said. "I wasn't sure either," Mia admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. "People have been talking all day. Some of them think you're here for some kind of political reason. Some think it's a trick. Others think I'm making the whole thing up for attention." Something dark flickered across Kale's face. "And what do you think?" Mia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I think I don't know what to think. I've spent my whole life being told I don't matter. It's hard to suddenly believe that the most powerful alpha in the region traveled all this way just because of me. Not because of you alone," Kale said gently. "Because of your father, and because of you. The two are connected, but they are not the same thing. I do not repay a debt simply to satisfy an old promise and then walk away. That is not how I choose to live, and it is not how I intend to treat this." "Then what do you intend?" Mia asked, her voice steadier now, driven by something that felt dangerously close to hope. Kale studied her for a long moment before answering. "I intend to make sure that the daughter of the man who saved my life is never again treated the way I watched your own pack treat you today." Mia's breath caught. "You saw that? With Nora?" "I saw enough," Kale said, his jaw tightening. That same barely contained anger she had glimpsed the day before returning to his features. "I did not interfere, because it was not yet my place to interfere, and because I wanted to understand the full shape of what you have been living with before I acted. But I will tell you now, Mia, that what I witnessed today was unacceptable, and it will not continue. You can't just change how an entire pack treats someone," Mia said, though part of her desperately wanted to believe he could. "No," Kale agreed. "Not from the outside, not by simply asking politely. But there are other ways to address it." He paused, glancing toward the darkening sky, the first stars beginning to emerge above the hills. "Tomorrow, I intend to speak with your alpha directly, and formally declare the debt I owe to your father's bloodline, in front of his entire pack. It is not a request, it is a right I hold as an alpha king, and no pack leader, however proud, can refuse to acknowledge it without insulting every wolf who witnesses the claim." Mia's heart pounded. "What does that mean for me?" Kale's expression softened, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something almost tender pass through his golden eyes. "It means, Mia Callahan, that starting tomorrow, no one in this pack will ever again be permitted to look at you and see nothing worth protecting." Morning came far too quickly. Mia stood at the edge of the pack's central hall, a wide stone building at the heart of the territory where all major gatherings and formal declarations took place, and watched as wolves from every corner of the pack began filing inside. Word had spread overnight that something significant was about to happen, and curiosity had drawn out nearly the entire population, even wolves who rarely bothered attending pack meetings. The air buzzed with whispered speculation, and more than a few glances found their way to Mia, standing awkwardly near the entrance in the plainest clothes she owned, feeling entirely unprepared for whatever was about to unfold. Lily appeared at her side, squeezing her hand briefly, before they found a place to stand near the back of the crowd. "You look like you're about to be sick," Lily murmured. "I feel like I might be," Mia admitted. At the front of the hall, seated in the raised chair reserved for pack leadership, Alpha Grant Osborne surveyed the gathering crowd with visible irritation. He was a broad-shouldered man, with a hard, weathered face and a reputation for ruling through fear rather than respect. Beside him, Nora sat with her chin lifted, her expression carefully composed, though Mia could see the tension in the way her hands gripped the arms of her own chair. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and every conversation in the room died at once. Cale Ashriver walked in without hesitation, without hurry, moving through the parted crowd with the effortless authority of someone who had never once needed to prove he belonged wherever he chose to stand. He was not accompanied by his full guard this time. Only 2 wolves flanked him, a woman with sharp eyes and cropped dark hair, who Mia would later learn was named Ivy, his most trusted healer and advisor, and a broad-shouldered man named Owen, his second in command, whose steady presence radiated quiet, controlled power. Grant rose from his chair, though the movement seemed reluctant, as if some part of him resented having to acknowledge Cale's presence with anything more than a nod. "Alpha Ashraver," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "This is an unexpected visit. Is it?" Cale's tone was calm, almost pleasant, though there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. "I would have thought word of my presence in your territory reached you well before now." A ripple of uneasy murmurs moved through the crowd. Grant's jaw tightened. "I heard rumors. I did not realize they warranted a formal audience." "They do," Cale said simply. "I am here to make a declaration, in front of your entire pack, regarding a debt I hold that concerns one of your members." Every eye in the room turned toward Mia. She felt her face flush hot, felt the weight of dozens of stares pressing against her skin, and forced herself to keep her chin lifted, to not shrink the way instinct urged her to. Grant's eyes narrowed as he followed the direction of everyone's attention. "The Omega," he said, his tone dripping with the same contempt Nora had shown the day before. "Surely you're mistaken, Alpha Ashriver. Whatever business brought you here, it cannot possibly involve someone of her standing." Something shifted in Cale's expression, a dangerous stillness settling over his features that made the hair on the back of Mia's neck rise even from where she stood. "Her name," he said, his voice dropping low and cold, "is Mia Callahan. And you would do well to remember it, Alpha Osborne, because after today, every wolf in this territory will know it." The hall fell utterly silent. Cale turned, addressing the crowd now rather than simply Grant, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the stone hall without needing to be raised. "Many years ago, during the War of Broken Fangs, I was gravely injured and left for dead at the bottom of a ravine in contested territory. I would have died there, alone, forgotten, if not for the actions of a soldier who owed me nothing, who risked his own life to save mine despite every reason to walk away. That soldier's name was Edwin Callahan." A murmur moved through the crowd, some recognizing the name, most simply absorbing the weight of the moment. "He set my broken bones with nothing but branches and torn cloth," Cale continued. "He carried me for 2 miles through hostile ground, and he left before I could properly thank him. It took me years to learn his name, and by the time I found the pack he belonged to, he had already passed. But he left behind a daughter." His gaze found Mia across the hall, steady, unwavering. "I have come to repay the debt I owe to Edwin Callahan's bloodline, and I stand here today to formally claim that debt on behalf of his daughter, Mia." Grant's face had gone pale, then flushed with something that looked dangerously close to anger, though he clearly understood he could not openly object without insulting an Alpha King in front of his own pack. "A generous gesture," he managed, his voice tight. "Though I fail to see what claiming a debt requires of my pack. It requires acknowledgement," Cale said, "and it requires an end to whatever mistreatment Mia has endured within your territory." His eyes swept briefly toward Nora, whose composed expression had cracked just slightly under his gaze. "I witnessed, personally, the manner in which she was addressed by members of your inner circle yesterday. I will not stand by and allow the daughter of the man who saved my life to be treated with such disrespect." Nora's mouth opened, some protest forming, but Grant's raised hand silenced her before she could speak. He understood, even if he resented it, that openly defying an Alpha King's claim in front of witnesses from every corner of his own territory would carry consequences far beyond a single uncomfortable conversation. "What exactly are you proposing?" Grant asked, his voice carefully neutral now, though his eyes had taken on a calculating sharpness. "I am offering Mia Callahan a place within my own territory," Cale said, "under my protection, with full standing and respect, effective from this moment forward. She is free to accept or decline this offer as she chooses, but I want it understood, by everyone in this hall, that regardless of her decision, she is no longer someone to be dismissed, mistreated, or overlooked. The debt her father earned protects her now, wherever she chooses to live." The weight of every gaze in the room settled on Mia once more, and this time, standing there with Lily's hand tight around hers, she felt something different beneath the fear. She felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely seen. Grant's composure cracked just slightly, a flicker of frustration crossing his face before he smoothed it away. "Of course," he said stiffly. "We would never wish to dishonor a debt of this significance. Mia is, naturally, free to make whatever choice she believes serves her best." The words were correct, but Mia could hear the resentment coiled beneath them, and she understood, even as relief washed through her, that Grant would not easily forgive being forced into this position in front of his entire pack. Cale did not seem concerned by that resentment in the slightest. He crossed the hall toward Mia, the crowd parting instinctively before him, and stopped a respectful distance away, his golden eyes searching her face. "You do not need to decide anything today," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that it felt almost private despite the crowd surrounding them. "I only wanted to ensure that this pack understood, clearly and publicly, that harming you carries consequences now that it did not carry before." Mia's throat tightened, emotion rising faster than she could contain it. "Why does this matter so much to you? You could have simply sent a message, offered some gift, to settle the debt from a distance. You didn't have to come here yourself. You didn't have to do any of this in front of everyone." Cale's expression softened, something warm and genuine breaking through the composed authority he had carried throughout the confrontation. "Because your father did not save my life from a distance," he said. "He climbed down into that ravine himself, at great risk, and he stayed until I was safe. A debt like that deserves to be repaid the same way it was earned, fully, in person, without hesitation." Around them, the hall had begun to stir again, whispered conversations breaking out in every direction, as wolves processed what they had just witnessed. Lily squeezed Mia's hand once more, her eyes bright with something between pride and disbelief, and for the first time since she was a small girl standing beside her father before he passed, Mia allowed herself to feel something she had almost forgotten the shape of. Hope. Behind the closed doors of the Alpha's private study, Grant Osborne slammed his fist against the heavy wooden desk, the force of it rattling the ink bottles lined along its edge. "He humiliated me," he growled, pacing the length of the room with barely restrained fury. "In front of my entire pack, over an Omega." Nora watched him from her chair near the fireplace, her fingers steepled thoughtfully in front of her lips. "It was not simply about the girl, Grant, you know that. It was a message. Cale Ashriver does not travel across half the Northern Territories to make grand speeches for no reason. He wanted every wolf in that hall to see him claim her, publicly, so that no one in this pack would dare question his authority over the matter." "And now what?" Grant snapped. "I'm supposed to simply allow her to walk around as though she matters, protected by the reputation of a man who isn't even here most of the time." "You cannot touch her," Nora said carefully, though something calculating flickered in her eyes. "Not openly, not now. But she has not left our territory yet. Ashriver made his declaration, but the choice, as he said himself, belongs to her, if she stays." Nora let the sentence trail off, allowing the implication to settle between them. Grant stopped pacing, turning to look at his mate with sudden interest. "If she stays, she remains within our reach." "Exactly," Nora said, a thin smile curving her lips. "And there are many ways to make someone's life difficult, without ever laying a hand on them directly. Accidents happen. Resources run short. People make mistakes when they are frightened, and desperate to prove they belong somewhere. If Mia grows uncomfortable enough here, she may simply decide the Ashriver Pack's offer was never real to begin with, or worse, that accepting it would only bring more trouble down on everyone she has ever known." Grant's expression sharpened with dark understanding. "You want to make her afraid enough to refuse him." "I want to make her doubt everything," Nora said quietly. "Doubt is far more effective than fear. Fear makes people run toward protection. Doubt makes them question whether they deserve it in the first place." Unaware of the conversation unfolding behind closed doors, Mia sat that evening at the small wooden table in her rented room, staring at a bowl of stew that had long since gone cold, her mind too consumed with everything that had happened to bother eating. Lily had stayed with her most of the afternoon, buzzing with excitement over the day's events, but she had finally returned home as the sun set, leaving Mia alone with her thoughts for the first time since the hall had emptied. She kept replaying Cale's words, turning them over in her mind, like stones she was afraid might crack under too much pressure. "He is a place within my own territory, under my protection, with full standing and respect. It sounded too good to be true, the kind of promise that belonged in the stories her father used to tell her as a child, not in the harsh, practical world she had learned to survive within. And that was the problem, wasn't it? She had learned to survive by expecting very little, by protecting herself from disappointment through the simple strategy of never hoping for too much. Every time she had allowed herself to believe things might improve, life had found some new way to remind her of her place. When her mother passed shortly after she was born, she had been raised by a father who loved her fiercely, but who could never quite compensate for a pack that treated her rank as a permanent mark of shame. When her father passed as well, she had been left entirely alone, without status, without protection, without anyone whose position in the hierarchy could shield her from casual cruelty. Could she really trust that an alpha king, a man with power and responsibilities spanning an entire northern territory, would continue to care about her circumstances once the drama of his public declaration had faded? Powerful people made grand gestures all the time. Nora's words from the market echoed uncomfortably in her mind. It rarely lasts. A soft knock at her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She rose cautiously, half expecting trouble, and found Ivy, the sharp-eyed healer who had accompanied Kale into the hall that morning, standing outside with a small basket balanced against her hip. "May I come in?" Ivy asked, her voice warm, despite the formality of the question. Mia stepped aside, allowing her entry, too surprised to think of a reason to refuse. Ivy moved into the small room with easy familiarity, setting the basket on the table and glancing briefly at the untouched stew before meeting Mia's eyes. "Kale asked me to check on you," she said. "He did not want to intrude himself, given everything that happened today, but he was concerned you might be struggling under the weight of it." Mia sat back down slowly, unsure how to respond. "I don't understand why he cares so much, about any of this, about me." Ivy studied her for a moment, before pulling out the second chair and sitting across from her. "May I tell you something about him? Something he would probably never say about himself?" Mia nodded. "Kale has spent most of his life carrying debts he felt he could never fully repay," Ivy said. "Not just to your father, though that one weighs heaviest on him. He lost people during that war, who he could not save. Wolves who died, believing in a cause he led them into. He has never forgiven himself for the ones he could not protect. Your father's kindness, the fact that a stranger with no obligation to him chose to save his life anyway, has stayed with him every single day since it happened. When he finally found you, and saw the way your own pack treated you, I believe some part of him saw an opportunity to make right at least one of the debts that has haunted him for years." She paused, her expression gentling further. "This is not a passing gesture to him, Mia. I have known Kale for a very long time, and I have never seen him pursue something with the seriousness he has shown since he learned your name." Something in Mia's chest loosened slightly, though the doubt did not vanish entirely. What if I'm not what he's expecting? What if I go there and I still don't fit anywhere, the same way I've never fit here? Ivy reached across the table and, with surprising gentleness, took Mia's hand. "Then you will have wolves around you who choose to make you fit, rather than wolves who have spent years deciding you don't belong. That is the difference, Mia. It is not about whether you are perfect or powerful or exactly what anyone expects. It is about whether the people around you are willing to make space for who you actually are." Mia sat with those words long after Ivy left, turning them over slowly, feeling the sharp edges of her old fear begin, just slightly, to soften. Outside her window, the moon had risen high over the hills, and somewhere beyond the edge of the territory, she knew Kale and his wolves remained, patient, waiting for whatever decision she chose to make. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to imagine, however cautiously, what it might feel like to belong somewhere, without having to fight for every scrap of acceptance. She did not yet know about the conversation unfolding in Grant's private study, about the quiet threats already forming against her, but some instinct deep within her, some inherited piece of her father's stubborn courage, told her that whatever came next, she would not face it the way she had always faced everything before. Alone. The fire started just before midnight. Mia woke to the sharp smell of smoke curling beneath her door, and within seconds, she was on her feet, coughing, her heart hammering as she realized the small storage shed behind her rented room, where she kept what little food and supplies she owned, was fully engulfed in flame. She stumbled outside, into the cold night air, watching in horror as the fire devoured everything she had managed to gather over the past several months. The dried herbs she sold for extra income, the small store of grain she had been saving carefully through the lean season. By the time other wolves arrived to help smother the flames, there was nothing left to save. An accident, the pack's fire warden told her the next morning, though his eyes would not quite meet hers as he said it. A stray ember, most likely. These things happen. Mia said nothing, though every instinct she possessed told her this had been no accident. The shed sat far from any cooking fire, isolated enough that a stray ember reaching it would have required a level of coincidence she found difficult to believe. She thought of Nora's cold smile in the market, of Grant's barely contained fury during Cale's declaration, and a chill settled over her that had nothing to do with the early morning air. Word reached Cale before noon. He arrived at her door with Owen at his side, his expression carefully controlled in a way that somehow made his anger more frightening than if he had simply raged openly. He surveyed the charred remains of the shed in silence for a long moment, before turning back to her. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Mia recounted the fire warden's dismissive explanation, the sinking suspicion she could not shake, despite having no proof to support it. Cale listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each detail, and when she finished, he crouched near the edge of the burned structure, examining the scorched ground with the careful attention of someone who had investigated far worse in his lifetime. "This was not an accident," he said finally, straightening. "The burn pattern suggests the fire was started at multiple points simultaneously, likely with oil or some other accelerant. A stray ember does not create 3 separate points of ignition along the base of a structure this size." Mia's stomach twisted. "You think someone did this on purpose?" "I know someone did this on purpose," Cale said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The only question is who, and I believe we both already suspect the answer. They found the answer sooner than expected." Lily arrived breathless within the hour, having heard whispers circulating through the younger wolves in the pack, rumors of a conversation overheard near the training grounds the previous evening between 2 of Nora's closest attendants, discussing how easily fear could be planted without anyone tracing it back to its source. "They didn't name names outright," Lily said, glancing nervously between Mia and Cale, clearly unsettled by the sheer intensity radiating off the Alpha King. "But it wasn't hard to understand what they meant. Someone wants you scared enough to leave on your own, before Alpha Ashriver's protection becomes permanent." Cale's expression darkened further, though he kept his voice steady, controlled in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting ever could have been. "Then they have made a significant mistake," he said. "I came here prepared to give Mia time to make her own decision, freely, without pressure. I did not come prepared to watch this pack attempt to harm her simply despite the fact that I claimed her father's debt in front of witnesses." "You can't prove it was them," Mia said, though even as she spoke the words, she understood how unlikely it was that anyone else bore her enough ill will to set fire to her only remaining possessions. "I do not need a courtroom's worth of proof to act," Cale said. "I need only enough certainty to know that leaving you here another night would be reckless." He turned to Owen. "Gather the guard. We return to our territory before nightfall." Mia's breath caught. "Cale, wait. I haven't decided." "I know," he said, and something in his expression gentled slightly despite the tension still coiled through his shoulders. "I am not forcing this decision on you, Mia. I am simply refusing to leave you exposed to further danger, while you take the time you need to consider it. You can decide to return here whenever you wish, once we are certain you are safe. But I will not stand by while someone attempts to burn away your sense of security, simply because they resent losing a small amount of leverage over you." Mia looked around at what remained of her few belongings, at the scorched earth where her modest security had stood only hours before, and felt something shift decisively within her. She thought of her father's grave, of the 20 white wolves that had circled it in silent honor, of Ivy's gentle words the night before, about wolves who chose to make space for who she actually was, rather than wolves who had spent years deciding she didn't belong. She thought of Nora's cold satisfaction, of Grant's barely restrained fury, of a pack that had never once, in 22 years, made her feel like anything other than an inconvenience to be tolerated. "All right," she said quietly, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I'll go with you." Relief flickered briefly across Cale's face before it settled back into careful composure. "You do not need to bring much," he said. "Whatever you require, My territory can provide. Mia glanced at the burned shed one final time, then toward Lily, whose eyes had filled with tears she was clearly fighting to hold back. You could come too, Mia said suddenly, the thought arriving before she had fully considered it. If you wanted. I don't want to leave you here alone with them. Lily managed a watery smile, shaking her head gently. I have family here, Mia. Responsibilities I can't walk away from the way you can. But I will visit, I promise you that. And if things ever become unbearable, I will remember that you offered me a way out. She pulled Mia into a tight embrace. Go. Be safe. Be somewhere people actually deserve you. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, Mia stood once more at the edge of the cemetery, kneeling briefly beside her father's headstone, while Cale and his wolves waited a respectful distance away. I don't know if you can hear me, she whispered, tracing the carved letters of his name with careful fingers. But I think you would want me to go. I think you would tell me it's finally time to stop trying to earn a place in a pack that was never going to give me one. She pressed a soft kiss to her fingertips and touched them gently to the cold stone. Thank you for saving him, all those years ago. I think in a strange way, you're still taking care of me. When she rose and turned back toward Cale, he was watching her with an expression she could not quite name, something that looked like quiet awe, mixed with fierce protectiveness. Ready? He asked softly. Mia looked once more at the small, familiar world she had known her entire life, at the pack that had never truly been hers, despite 22 years spent trying to belong within it, and felt, for the first time, the quiet certainty of a decision made freely, without fear driving her choice. Ready, she said. Together, surrounded by 20 white wolves who had already begun forming a protective circle around them both, Mia Callahan walked away from everything she had ever known, toward a future she could not yet fully imagine, but which felt, for reasons she could not entirely explain, exactly like where she was always meant to go. The attack came without warning, just as the group crossed into the shadowed edge of the Thornwood Pass. One moment, Mia was walking quietly beside Cale, listening to Owen describe the layout of the Northern Territory, in low, steady tones, meant to ease her nerves about what waited ahead. The next moment, 3 wolves burst from the tree line, dark-furred and snarling, moving with the coordinated speed of trained fighters rather than random scavengers. Rogues! Owen barked, already shifting mid-stride, fur rippling across his skin, faster than Mia's eyes could track. Cale moved before she could even process what was happening, stepping directly between her and the charging wolves, his own shift completing in a blur of motion, fur the color of fresh snow replacing skin in the space of a single heartbeat. The white wolves accompanying them fanned out instantly, forming a tight defensive circle around Mia, while the largest among them moved to meet the threat head-on. Mia stumbled backward, her heart slamming against her ribs, every instinct screaming at her to run, even as some steadier part of her mind recognized that running blindly through unfamiliar terrain would only make her more vulnerable. She pressed herself against the trunk of a nearby tree, watching in stunned, terrified awe, as Cale met the largest of the attacking wolves head-on, the impact of their collision echoing through the pass like a thunderclap. The fight was brutal but brief. Cale moved with a precision that spoke of decades of experience, each strike calculated, economical, devastating. Within moments, 2 of the rogue wolves had retreated, yelping in pain, disappearing back into the tree line, while the third lay subdued beneath Owen's weight, snarling, but clearly overpowered. Cale shifted back to human form almost immediately, breathing hard but otherwise unharmed, and turned toward Mia with an urgency that cut through the last of her frozen panic. Are you hurt? He demanded, closing the distance between them in several quick strides. No, Mia managed, her voice shaking. I'm fine. What was that? Why would rogue wolves attack a group this size? Cale's expression darkened as he glanced back toward the subdued wolf still pinned beneath Owen. Rogues do not typically attack groups of this size without reason, or without payment. He crouched near the captured wolf, his voice dropping to something cold and commanding. Who sent you? The wolf beneath Owen's grip whimpered, but said nothing, and Cale's jaw tightened with understanding rather than surprise. No matter, he said quietly. We will learn soon enough. He rose and returned to Mia's side, his earlier urgency softening into something gentler, as he studied her still trembling hands. "I am sorry you had to witness that," he said. "I did not expect trouble this close to the border, though I should have anticipated that news of my declaration might reach ears eager to test whether I would defend what I claimed." "You think someone paid them," Mia said slowly, "to attack us, because of me?" "I think it is possible," Cale admitted. "Territorial politics are rarely simple, and a public claim as significant as the one I made carries weight that not everyone will welcome quietly. It does not matter. Whatever the reason, you are safe, and we will reach my territory well before nightfall." Despite his reassurance, Mia found herself glancing over her shoulder more than once as they continued through the pass, unable to fully shake the lingering unease of how quickly danger had arrived, how close the encounter had come to ending very differently. But she also found herself watching Cale with newfound understanding, seeing beyond the calm authority he carried into the fierce, immediate protectiveness that had driven him to place himself between her and danger without a moment's hesitation. By the time the trees began to thin and the land opened into wide, rolling hills bathed in the gold light of late afternoon, Mia's nerves had settled into something quieter, steadier. Ahead of them, nestled against a backdrop of distant mountains, sprawled the Ashriver territory, larger and more beautiful than anything she had imagined. Stone buildings with warm, lit windows dotted the landscape, surrounded by fields of grain swaying gently in the breeze, and beyond them, a great hall rose against the horizon, its architecture both imposing and strangely welcoming. "This is it," Cale said quietly, watching her reaction with something like nervous anticipation, an expression that seemed almost out of place on a man who commanded such effortless authority in every other circumstance. "This is home." Mia stood at the edge of the hill, overlooking the territory, taking in the scale of it, the obvious prosperity, the sense of order and care, evident in even the smallest details of the landscape before her. It was nothing like the modest, struggling territory she had left behind, and for a moment, the old doubt crept back in, whispering that she would never fit into a place this grand, this powerful. As if sensing the shift in her expression, Cale stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "I know it feels overwhelming. It felt that way to me too, once, before I understood that a territory is not defined by its size or its wealth, but by the wolves who choose to make it their home. You do not need to have all the answers today, Mia. You only need to take the first step." Mia glanced at him, at the sincerity written plainly across his features, and felt the last of her hesitation ease, just slightly, into something that resembled cautious hope. "All right," she said softly. "Show me home." They descended the hill together, the setting sun casting long golden shadows across the fields, 20 white wolves trailing behind them, like a living reminder of the promise that had brought her here. As they drew closer to the great hall, wolves began to emerge from the surrounding buildings, curious and murmuring, watching the arrival of their alpha with obvious surprise at the unfamiliar woman walking calmly at his side. Mia felt the familiar tightening of anxiety return, the instinctive bracing for judgment she had carried her entire life. But this time, something was different. The stares she received were not filled with contempt or dismissal. They were simply curious, open, waiting to understand who she was, rather than already deciding she didn't matter. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Mia allowed herself to imagine, however cautiously, that this might actually be a place where she could finally belong. The confrontation happened on Mia's third day in the territory, in the training yard behind the Great Hall, where she had gone simply to watch the younger wolves practice from a safe distance. "An Omega, given quarters in the main hall itself," a voice sneered from somewhere behind her. "I've heard of strange decisions, but this one takes the honor." Mia turned to find a broad-shouldered wolf named Darren watching her with open hostility, his arms crossed, several other wolves gathered loosely behind him, with expressions ranging from curious to openly disapproving. She recognized the particular flavor of contempt in his voice immediately, having heard variations of it her entire life. "I didn't ask for special treatment," she said quietly, refusing to let her voice shake. "Didn't you?" Darren's smile was thin and unkind. "Word travels fast, even here. The Alpha King bows at a grave, declares some old war debt, and suddenly an Omega, with no rank, no training, no strength to speak of, is given quarters most warriors in this pack spend years earning. Forgive me if I find that difficult to respect." Before Mia could respond, a sharp voice cut across the training yard. "And forgive me, Darren, if I find your tone difficult to tolerate." Ivy strode toward them, her expression carrying the same sharp intensity Mia remembered from their first meeting. She positioned herself firmly beside Mia, arms crossed, meeting Darren's hostile stare without flinching. "She earned nothing dishonestly," Ivy continued, her voice carrying easily across the yard, drawing the attention of every wolf nearby. "Her father saved Kale's life during the war, at great personal risk, expecting nothing in return. If you have a problem with how Kale chooses to honor that debt, I suggest you take it up with him directly, rather than cornering someone who has done nothing, except exist within a pack that never once appreciated her." Darren's jaw tightened, clearly unwilling to challenge Ivy's authority directly, but his eyes remained fixed on Mia with obvious distrust. "Rank exists for a reason," he said stubbornly. "Strength, contribution, sacrifice. What has she contributed, beyond being someone's daughter?" The question landed harder than Mia expected, echoing uncomfortably close to thoughts she had carried her entire life. Before she could stop herself, she found her voice rising, steadier than she anticipated. "You're right that I haven't contributed anything yet," she said, surprising both Darren and herself with the directness of her response. "I've been here 3 days, but I intend to. I don't expect anyone to hand me respect I haven't earned, and I don't want it that way. Give me the chance to prove I belong here through my own actions, not just my father's, and if I fail to do that, you'll have every right to say so." Silence settled over the training yard, several of the surrounding wolves exchanging surprised glances at her unexpected boldness. Even Darren seemed momentarily caught off guard, his hostile expression flickering with something closer to grudging consideration. "Bold words," he finally said, "for an Omega." "Maybe," Mia replied, holding his gaze steadily, "but they're mine." The tension broke unexpectedly when Owen's deep voice sounded from the edge of the yard. "Darren." A word. Darren's shoulders tensed, clearly recognizing the authority in Owen's tone, and after a final assessing look at Mia, he turned and followed Owen away from the training grounds without further protest. The remaining wolves dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves, and Ivy finally relaxed beside Mia, a small, approving smile touching her lips. "That took courage," Ivy said, "more than most newcomers show in their first week here." "I've spent my whole life being told I don't belong anywhere," Mia said quietly. "I'm tired of accepting that without at least trying to prove it wrong." Ivy studied her with obvious approval. "Then let's give you the opportunity to do exactly that." She gestured toward the healer's quarters at the edge of the yard. "I could use an assistant, someone patient, careful, willing to learn. The work isn't glamorous, but it matters, and it would give you a way to build standing here through your own effort, exactly as you said you wanted." Mia felt something warm bloom in her chest at the offer, a purpose freely given, rather than grudgingly permitted. "I'd like that," she said. "Very much." That evening, as Mia helped Ivy organize a shelf of carefully labeled herbs, Kale appeared in the doorway, his expression carrying the particular weariness of someone who had spent the afternoon dealing with pack matters, far less pleasant than herbal remedies. "I heard about the training yard," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Mia glanced up, bracing slightly for concern or intervention she hadn't asked for. "I handled it." "I heard that too," Kale said, and to her surprise, something like pride flickered across his features. "Darren has a difficult temperament, but he respects strength when he sees it, even when it doesn't come wrapped in the form he expects." He paused. "I also spoke with Owen about the rogue wolves from the pass. We managed to trace payment back to a small sum transferred through an intermediary in your former pack's territory." Mia's stomach tightened. "Grant. Or Nora," Kale said grimly. "We cannot yet prove which of them arranged it, though I suspect it matters little. Either way, the message was clear. Someone within your former pack wanted to ensure you never reached my territory safely." "What happens now?" Mia asked, unease creeping back in despite the warmth of the day's small victories. "Now," Kale said, "I ensure it never happens again. I have sent word to Grant Osborne, formally, that any further attempt against you, direct or indirect, will be treated as an act of aggression against my territory itself." "He understands," Better than most. What consequences that would carry. His golden eyes softened as they settled on her. You are protected here, Mia. Fully. I intend to make certain of that, regardless of what schemes anyone attempts from a distance. Mia held his gaze for a long moment, something unfamiliar and warm unfurling slowly in her chest, distinct from the gratitude and relief she had felt so often since their first meeting at her father's grave. It felt, she realized with quiet surprise, dangerously close to something else entirely. Thank you, she said softly, for all of it. Cale's expression shifted into something gentler, something that lingered just a moment longer than necessary, before he composed himself again. You do not need to thank me, Mia. I told you once already, this is simply making things right. But as he turned to leave, Mia could not shake the feeling that whatever was growing between them had already moved well beyond the boundaries of an old debt finally being repaid. The scream tore through the training yard just as the sun began to set, sharp and full of pain, sending Mia sprinting from the healer's quarters before she had even fully registered what she was running toward. A young wolf named Finn lay crumpled near the sparring circle, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face pale with shock, as several other trainees hovered around him, uncertain and panicked. Ivy was nowhere in sight, having left earlier that afternoon to gather supplies from the eastern fields, and for a long, terrifying moment, no one seemed to know what to do. Mia dropped to her knees beside Finn without hesitation, years of watching Ivy work rising instinctively to the surface. I need someone to hold him still, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. And someone else. Bring me 2 straight branches from the woodpile, and something to tear into strips for binding. The trainees, startled by the sudden authority in her voice, moved quickly to obey. Mia examined the break carefully, remembering everything Ivy had taught her over the past weeks, about setting bones without causing further damage, about the delicate balance between speed and precision when time mattered. This is going to hurt, she warned Finn gently, but it will hurt more if we wait. I need you to stay as still as you can. Finn, barely more than 16, nodded through gritted teeth, and Mia worked quickly, setting the bone with careful, confident hands, binding it securely between the branches the other trainees had brought. By the time Ivy returned, breathless from having heard the commotion from across the fields, Finn's leg had been properly splinted, the worst of the danger already managed. Ivy knelt to examine Mia's work, running careful fingers along the binding, checking the alignment of the bone beneath. When she finally looked up, her expression carried unmistakable pride. This is excellent work, she said. Precise, careful, exactly as it should be done. She glanced around at the gathered trainees, several of whom were watching Mia with new, undisguised respect. You may have just saved this boy from a lifetime of walking with a crooked leg. Do you understand what that means? Mia shook her head slightly, still catching her breath from the adrenaline of the moment. It means, Ivy said, that you have officially outgrown being my assistant. From this day forward, you are a healer of this pack in your own right. The words settled over Mia with a weight she hadn't expected, warm and solid, nothing like the empty validation she had occasionally received in her old pack for tasks no one else wanted to bother with. This felt earned. This felt real. Word of the incident spread quickly through the territory, and by the time evening settled over the Great Hall, Mia found herself the subject of considerably warmer attention than she had grown accustomed to during her first days there. Even Darren, when their paths crossed near the dining hall, offered her a short, respectful nod that felt like a genuine concession rather than empty courtesy. Cale found her later that night, sitting alone on the wide stone steps overlooking the training yard, still turning the day's events over in her mind. He settled beside her without asking permission, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. I heard what you did for Finn, he said. Ivy taught me well, Mia replied, though a small, proud smile tugged at her lips despite her attempt at modesty. She taught you the skill, Cale agreed, but the composure, the willingness to act decisively when others froze, that came from somewhere else entirely. He turned to study her profile in the fading light. You continue to surprise me, Mia Callahan. Is that a bad thing? No, he said softly. It is quite the opposite. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long moment, the sounds of the settling pack drifting around them, distant laughter, the soft crackle of cooking fires, the quiet rustle of wind through the surrounding fields. Mia found herself acutely aware of how close Cale sat beside her, of the warmth of his shoulder nearly brushing hers, of the steady, quiet way he seemed to simply enjoy her presence, without requiring conversation to fill every silence. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything? Why does it feel like this has become about more than just the debt?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable than she intended. "I don't understand what's happening between us, and I don't want to imagine something that isn't there." Cale was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the deepening dusk. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a rare, careful honesty. "I have asked myself the same question, more than once, since the morning I found you at your father's grave. I came to repay a debt, Mia. That much was true. But somewhere between that first morning and this evening, watching you set a young wolf's broken leg with more courage than warriors twice his size, I stopped thinking about you as an obligation, and started thinking about you as someone I simply did not want to imagine my territory without." Mia's breath caught, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I don't know what that means yet," Cale continued softly, "or what you want it to mean. I do not wish to pressure you into feeling something before you are ready, especially after everything you have endured. But I wanted you to know the truth of it, rather than let you wonder." Mia looked at him then, really looked at him, at the golden eyes that had first found her across a misty cemetery, at the quiet strength he carried, without ever needing to prove it, through cruelty the way Grant always had, and she felt something settle within her, steady and certain, in a way few things in her life had ever felt before. "I think," she said slowly, "that I don't want to imagine this place without you either." The smile that broke across Cale's face in response was unlike anything she had seen from him before, unguarded and full of a warmth that made her chest ache in the best possible way. Neither of them moved to close the remaining distance between them, not yet, both instinctively understanding that whatever was growing between them deserved patience rather than haste. But sitting there together beneath the darkening sky, surrounded by a territory that had already begun to feel, impossibly, like home, Mia understood that everything was about to change. The messenger arrived at dawn, breathless and travel-worn, bearing news that made Cale's expression harden instantly. "Alpha Osborne approaches your border," the messenger reported, with a formal delegation. "He claims Mia Callahan remains a member of his pack by birthright, and that her presence here without his official release violates territorial law." Mia's stomach dropped as she listened from the doorway of the healer's quarters, Ivy's steadying hand appearing on her shoulder, before she had even realized her legs had gone unsteady beneath her. "That's not true," she said. "He gave his approval, in front of the entire hall. Everyone heard him." "He gave grudging acknowledgement," Cale said grimly, already moving toward the door. "Not formal release. It is a technicality, and a desperate one, but if he intends to press the matter through territorial law, rather than open conflict, it could create complications neither of us wants." He turned to her, his expression carrying a fierce, protective determination. "Do not worry, Mia. Whatever law he attempts to invoke, it will not succeed." By mid-morning, Grant Osborne stood at the edge of the Ash River territory, flanked by a dozen of his own warriors, and, unmistakably, by Nora, whose composed expression could not fully hide the satisfaction glittering in her eyes. Cale met them at the border with Owen, and a full contingent of his own guard, Mia standing just behind him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury she had rarely allowed herself to feel so openly. "Alpha Osborne," Cale said, his voice carrying the deceptively calm edge she now recognized as barely contained anger. "This is a bold journey to make, considering the warning I sent regarding further interference with Mia Callahan's safety." Grant's jaw tightened, though he held his ground. "I am not here to interfere, Alpha Ashriver. I am here to correct a misunderstanding. Mia remains, by birthright and formal pack law, a member of my territory. My acknowledgement of your debt did not constitute a formal release of her standing. Without that release, her continued presence here is, technically, unlawful." "Convenient timing," Cale said coldly, "for you to suddenly discover this technicality, weeks after your own agents attempted to burn her belongings and pay rogue wolves to attack her during her journey here." A ripple of tension moved through both gathered groups. Grant's composure flickered, briefly, before he recovered. "I have no knowledge of any such actions." "Do you not?" Cale's voice sharpened. We traced the payment for the rogue attack directly to an intermediary within your territory. I chose not to pursue open conflict over the matter, out of respect for the fragile peace between our packs. I would advise you not to test that restraint further. Nora stepped forward then, her voice smooth and deliberately reasonable. Regardless of past misunderstandings, the law remains the law, Alpha Ashriver. Surely a leader of your standing would not wish to be seen disregarding proper procedure, simply because it proves inconvenient. Mia felt her hands curl into fists at her sides, years of swallowed anger finally rising to the surface. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward, past Kale, until she stood directly facing the two people who had spent years making her feel worthless. "I'll settle this myself," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, carrying clearly across the tense space between the two groups. "If pack law requires a formal release, then I formally request it, right now, in front of every witness gathered here." Grant's eyes narrowed, clearly caught off guard by her directness. "You would need to state your reasoning, before witnesses, according to proper procedure." "Fine," Mia said. "My reasoning is this. For 22 years, I lived in your territory as an Omega, treated as less than every other wolf around me, denied resources, denied respect, denied even basic kindness, simply because of a rank I never chose. When Alpha Ashriver came to honor a debt my father earned through genuine sacrifice, your pack's response was to threaten my life, rather than acknowledge that debt with any grace. I do not wish to remain connected to a territory that showed me nothing but cruelty for the entirety of my life within it. I formally request release from Grant Osborne's pack, and I ask every witness here to remember exactly why that request is necessary." Silence stretched taut across the border clearing. Grant's face had gone pale with the public accusation, fully aware that refusing her request now, in front of witnesses from both territories, would only confirm every word she had spoken. "Very well," he said finally, his voice tight with barely restrained fury. "You are formally released from my territory, Mia Callahan. You effective immediately." The words landed with a finality that made Mia's breath catch. Years of feeling trapped within a place that had never wanted her finally, completely severed. She felt Kale step up beside her, close enough that his presence radiated steady warmth against the cold satisfaction of the moment. "This matter is settled then," Kale said, his tone leaving no room for further negotiation. "I would advise you, Alpha Osborne, to return to your own territory, and to remember that any future interference, direct or indirect, will no longer be met with restraint." Grant said nothing further, his jaw tight with humiliation as he turned and gathered his delegation, retreating back across the border without another word. Nora lingered only a moment longer, her cold gaze finding Mia's one final time. "Enjoy your victory," she said quietly, though there was no warmth in the words, only bitter acknowledgement. "It seems you have finally found somewhere that wants you." "I have," Mia said simply, without malice, without the need to strike back the way Nora always had. "And I hope, someday, you understand what it cost to spend your life making sure other people never feel that way." As Nora turned to follow Grant back across the border, Mia felt the last, lingering weight of her old life finally lift from her shoulders, replaced by something lighter, freer than she had felt in longer than she could remember. Kale turned to her once the delegation had fully disappeared from view, his expression a mixture of fierce pride and quiet relief. "That," he said, "took remarkable courage." "I learned from someone who showed me it was possible," Mia said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Someone who bowed at a grave, and never once made me feel like I owed him anything for it." Kale's expression softened into something unguarded, something that made her heart skip in a way she had grown increasingly familiar with over the past weeks. "You owe me nothing, Mia. You never have." "I know," she said softly. "That's exactly why I want to stay." 3 months passed before Kale finally led her back to the same quiet cemetery where their story had begun. He had asked her to come with him without explaining why, simply requesting her presence with a gentleness that told her whatever waited had significance beyond a casual visit. They traveled together, just the two of them this time, no guard of 20 white wolves surrounding them, only the quiet companionship that had grown steadily between them since that first tense morning, when she had turned to find him bowing at her father's grave. The headstone looked exactly as she remembered it, weathered but well tended, the the wildflowers she had planted months ago now grown thick and colorful around its base. Cale knelt beside it, running his fingers gently over the carved letters of Edwin Callahan's name, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a solemn weight she had rarely heard from him. "I came here to tell you something, Edwin," he said quietly, addressing the grave directly, "and I wanted your daughter to hear it as well." He rose, turning to face Mia fully. "The debt I owed you is settled. It was settled the moment I ensured your daughter's safety, gave her a place to belong, and watched her prove, entirely through her own courage and skill, that she deserves every bit of respect this territory has finally learned to give her." Mia felt tears gathering, unexpected and overwhelming, as Cale reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, wrapped carefully in soft cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a delicate silver pendant shaped like a wolf mid-stride, simple and elegant, clearly crafted with careful attention. "This is not part of the debt," he said, his voice growing quieter, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "The debt is finished, Mia. You owe me nothing, and if you wish to build a life anywhere else, in any territory, I would ensure you had everything you needed to do so freely, without obligation to me." Mia's breath caught, uncertainty flickering through her despite the steady warmth that had grown between them over the past months. "Then why?" "Because what I feel for you now has nothing to do with the debt," Cale continued, closing the distance between them. "It has not, for a long time. I watched you set a boy's broken leg with more courage than warriors twice his age. I watched you stand before the pack that mistreated you for 22 years and demand your freedom with a strength that left me in awe. I have fallen in love with you, Mia Callahan, not because of who your father was, but because of who you are, entirely on your own merit." The pendant caught the afternoon light as he held it out to her, and Mia understood, with a clarity that settled warm and certain through her chest, exactly what he was offering. "I am not asking you to accept this because you feel you owe me anything," Cale said softly. "I am asking because I want you beside me, as my equal, as my mate, for the rest of both our lives, but only if that is genuinely what you want too." Mia looked at him, at the man who had knelt at her father's grave as a stranger, and had since become the steadiest, warmest presence in her entire life, and felt no hesitation at all in her answer.
"I choose you,"
she said, her voice thick with emotion but utterly certain. "Not because of any debt, and not because I have nowhere else to go. I choose you because somewhere between that first morning and now, you became the place I wanted to belong." Cale's smile broke across his face like sunrise, unguarded and full of a joy she had never seen from him before. He stepped closer, fastening the pendant gently around her neck, his fingers lingering briefly against her skin, before he cupped her face in both hands. "Then let us make it official," he murmured, in front of the one witness who matters most to both of us. He glanced toward the headstone, and Mia followed his gaze, understanding immediately what he meant. Together, they knelt before her father's grave, and Cale spoke the words of a mate's claim, formal and ancient, binding not through obligation, but through choice, freely given, on both sides. Mia answered in kind, her voice steady, despite the tears sliding freely down her cheeks, and when their lips finally met beneath the quiet afternoon sky, she felt something settle deep within her chest, whole and certain, in a way nothing in her life had ever felt before. When they finally rose, hand in hand, the mist that had first surrounded them months ago had long since burned away beneath clear, bright sunlight, and somewhere in the distance, Mia could have sworn she heard the faint, familiar echo of wolves howling in celebration, though whether it came from Cale's guard waiting patiently beyond the tree line, or simply from her own overwhelmed heart, she could not entirely say. They returned to the Ashriver territory that evening, to a celebration already in full swing, word having spread quickly among the pack that their alpha had finally claimed his mate. Ivy embraced her warmly. Owen offered a rare, genuine smile, and even Darren, watching from the edge of the gathering, raised his cup toward her with quiet, unmistakable respect. Lily arrived 2 days later, having received word through a messenger Cale had sent personally, and the reunion between the two friends was filled with tears and laughter, in equal measure. Lily marveling at the transformation in Mia, at the confidence and warmth radiating from her in a way that had never been possible within the confines of her old life. Standing at the center of it all, surrounded by a pack that had chosen to embrace her fully, beside a mate who had proven, again and again, that his devotion had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine love. Mia thought back to that misty morning when she had turned to find 20 white wolves circling her father's grave. She understood now, with a certainty that settled warm and permanent through her heart, that her father's final gift to her had not simply been survival, or protection, or even the debt Cale had traveled so far to repay. It had been the chance, however unlikely, to finally find a place in the world where she belonged completely, exactly as herself. And as the sun set golden over the Ashriver territory, casting long shadows across fields that now truly felt like home, Mia Callahan, once dismissed as nothing more than an overlooked Omega, stood beside the Alpha King who loved her freely, fully, without condition, and understood that every difficult year that came before had led her, step by step, to exactly this moment. Home, at last.